Vintage computing. Why should kids be involved? By me, Zoe Smith. So I guess we should start with, who am I? And why am I here? Yeah, I'm from Texas, and I'm here visiting my grandmother because my mom's from England. I was gifted a Power Mac G4, and I've worked on it a little bit, so there's some updates on that. And then I also have a 2010 Furby, 2013, I believe. Yeah. Okay. Strap in to the time machine, because we're going back to the 1970s. This right here is the IBM 1401. It was used to do data analysis for small businesses up until the mid-1980s, I believe. It also was used most commonly in the 1970s in government facilities and other places. It was used in retail as well, very often. And why am I talking about this? Well, it'll make sense it'll make sense soon. And then we also have this phone. That phone, that giant thing on it is a battery, and all it could do was make calls. Here I have something very similar. It's very heavy, and this was used in the 1980s. So within 50 years, we were able to compress this thing down, which took up an entire room. And we were able to compress that down, combine it with that, give it a screen, all within 50 years, and now you have what's in your pocket. And that's really important, considering that we are on our phones very often. It is a very vital part of work, and kids just like to scroll forever on their phones. So that's where it came from. And can be a person who I was asking for feedback as to why kids should be interested in vintage computers. I really liked his response, so here's a little segment of what he said. All things pass into history, and that what was so clearly understood half a century ago and is now such a mystery, what we take for granted today as no-brainers, will in fact be a mystery to those 50 years from now. Continuing on, video games. We all love video games, but they also have importance. So let's talk about John Carmack. He was told it was impossible to have side-scrolling on an IBM PC. So, considering what everyone said, he wanted to prove them wrong and made side-scrolling on an IBM PC. He's so rebellious. The first game he made was Super Mario Brothers. He pitched the idea to Nintendo, and Nintendo said no. It's in the name. So he had to come up with his own idea because he still wanted to prove that side-scrolling was possible and wanted to share it with the world. So he made Commander Keen. Commander Keen was a huge hit, and it was Nintendo came back and asked, hey, can we put this on a Game Boy? And he said, yeah. So Nintendo made a mistake there, clearly. And Commander Keen is now on the Game Boy. And this was very important because now we have games like Doom and Wolfenstein, which I believe at least one of those was made by John Carmack. Okay, next let's talk about one of the biggest names at Nintendo, Miyamoto. He was bored one day and ideas came to him. He came up with Kirby and Mario. These characters were huge in the US, and although Nintendo originally flopped in the UK, it had a return because of all the games that involved Mario, kind of brought Nintendo back because of how big Mario was. There is a huge indie animation company called Glitch Productions, and it all started out with Super Mario 64. On May 8th, 2011, Super Mario Glitchy 4 released his first video at 11 years old. That video right there. You can find that scene in Super Mario 64. And this video blew up, and he started learning how to animate. As he started to learn how to animate, his brother and him came up with some show ideas. And they came out with MetaRunner, which was sponsored by the Australian government. And it all started because Miyamoto made Mario. It's a really interesting effect because this company has the biggest indie animated show of our time. And that is absolutely crazy, considering Miyamoto can't do anything about it. I think it's kind of funny because he really wants to sue them. Okay, well, continuing on, Steve Wozniak. In a classroom, there were limited computers, and Woz really wanted his own computer. He went out, looked for a computer, and couldn't find one that was within his budget. So instead of giving up, he made his own computer out of wood and spare parts. And here's a replica of it. He worked with Steve Jobs, and I think they were originally at Atari together. I think that's where they met. And they started building up Apple. And that's also very important because those two things I talked about being compressed into one, that they played a huge part in that as well. Okay. And now we can talk about two of the guys who are UK based. So first we have the Darling brothers. So they were two teenagers and they liked to code. They turned bedroom coding into like an entire thing, and they started releasing video games on cassettes, and they were selling them. And without them, we probably would not have a lot of like the communities for Kids Can Code today, because they inspired a lot of that because they were just teenagers whenever they started making games. And they're still active today. They came out with a new game last year. And then we have Jeff Minter. And he is one of, like, I would like to say, the original indie game person, because back in the 90s, I want to say, he was trying to prove that it was possible to make games with huge ideas and a lot of complex work without having a big name company helping you. And he did that, and he's still making a bunch of games. His most popular one is Grid Runner. And again, why are both of these guys important? Without these guys, we would not have a bunch of the huge indie games that are really relevant to kids right now, like Five Nights at Freddy's, Poppy Playtime, without them. And those are some of the only things some kids can talk about. Possibly without them, we wouldn't have Roblox, we wouldn't have Unity, we wouldn't have Scratch, and we wouldn't have the style of bedroom coders that we do today. Continuing on, here are some consoles. I know the Commodore 64 isn't technically a video game thingy, but I had to bring it up because I'm already talking about the Atari 7800 Plus. This right here, it was made in 2023. The Atari 7800 Plus, they wanted to bring some of the retro magic into the world that was experienced back in the 1980s. And here's the Atari 7800. I'm pretty sure it's slightly smaller than this, but it basically does all the same things, and they just really wanted to revamp it and give it a little bit more functionality. And without taking away anything, and without adding too much. And it still feels very similar. And this is the Commodore 64X. Here's the Commodore 64. I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of it. It was the most popular computer. But they made the Commodore 64X, which contained Commodore OS, Commodore 64 OS? I don't know. It released a new operating system. That operating system is really cool, and it's really modern, but it still has the same functions as the Commodore 64, and they also wanted to bring in some of the retro magic that kids in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s experienced that kids these days will not get to experience because computers are really common now. So it's not really that special getting a new computer because our parents have one. You probably already have a phone. It's not as special as it used to be. It's kind of sad to see that we won't be able to experience the same nostalgia as a bunch of adults got to experience. And if we want to change that, and we want more companies to start doing what Atari and Commodore did, then the kids need to start expressing interest, because these things are really cool, and they're kind of fun to experiment with. I don't know. Continuing on, it's fun fact time. Did you know that in the 1950s, scientists were trying to make computers sing? They successfully did it using the IBM 7094, and they got it to sing Daisy Bell. And they used two people, that sounded very wrong. They had two people who made the actual speech and one person working on the backing. And this is incredible considering it was in the 1950s, even before that huge thing that took up an entire room for data analysis. Take a listen. It doesn't sound terrible. It was the 1950s. And that was a huge step in early speech synthesis. This kind of speech synthesis without the vocals, it was fine. Commodore 64 and Apple II and the Apple II and a bunch of other computers also got speech synthesis, and you could now make computers talk. And also, the Yamaha DX7, a popular synth that was in a lot of 80s music. This is the same company that put together Vocaloid. Vocaloid was also using early speech synthesis, and they made a bunch of voice banks, as in, I think, the face of the internet. I feel like everybody's seen her. If you don't know her name, you've still seen her. They put this synth on there, and they would sell this, and they made what the IBM 7094 did. They brought that into the community, and now for some money, you could buy what the IBM 7094 did with slightly improved quality. Well, let's be honest, a lot of improved quality. And take a listen to Hatsune Miku, who was tuned to sing Daisy Bell. it sounds a little more natural and also way more pleasing to the ear. And that was 2013. Her voice bank has since been improved upon, and there are multiple other voice banks. Here are the benefits. My favorite one is it can do your homework. I mean, it's pretty cool. Like if you're doing simple math equations, you can program it so it can do those equations for you. And all you have to think through is typing and thinking of the program. It's a lot better than actually doing the work, because it feels like you're cheating, but you're not, because it's still your work, and you're still gaining a lot of benefits by learning how to code. And then programming. Programming is, if you start with vintage computers, you can slowly ease yourself into what we have today for programming, because what we have today is very complex and not as visually appealing. The older programming software was well, it was a little bit more unforgiving, but like QBasic, it's very simple in some ways, but also it ties into a bunch of later BASIC, and they're just great to start with. And you can make, because you know how I was saying bedroom coders, those bedroom coders who started out with the vintage programming things they were working with that, and they're still creating things today. So that just goes to show that you can start somewhere and it can take off, because if you're still releasing things very far into the future, programming is a very useful skill. And then it also gives you lots of programming skills, as in vintage computing in of itself. Because whether you're trying to research about something, whether you're taking apart a computer, whether you're repairing a computer, whether you're programming, you're still learning a lot. And it's giving you problem-solving skills. Even if you're just taking apart a computer to look at it, that'll later be useful if you're using a modern computer, because you can kind of see what's very complex in computers nowadays as something a little smaller, but something also bigger, because you can see everything slightly broken down. And if you accidentally mess up while looking at a computer, you can repair it. And those repairs require problem-solving skills, because maybe you don't exactly know what to do. Maybe you don't exactly know what you just broke. Maybe you don't exactly know anything. What if you just accidentally failed? It's never happened before. It gives you a lot of problem-solving skills, because you will have to figure out something to work in the meantime, or if you're looking something up about a retro computer, well, it's going to be kind of difficult, because you have to go and jump through hoops sometimes, because they're vintage computers. They're not the computers everybody uses nowadays. So they're not, because the internet is going to, like official sites are going to just be talking about their newer computers, because that's what everyone is interested in right now. That's what everyone has. So you have to come up with multiple ways to find what you're looking for if it's a vintage computer. And it gives you an understanding of computers. Every single thing you do on a vintage computer will kind of become relevant to whatever your computer is doing now, as in your modern computer. Because if you're taking apart a computer, that every single thing that that computer does is compressed down, and it fits in maybe something this big. And that's kind of confusing. If you take one apart, and you cannot tell what's going on because you haven't started out with that. If you start with a computer that is this small, and you're taking it apart, trying to figure out what each piece does, what? It's so small. However, if you look at those, you can kind of see some of the basic elements, and you can progressively start taking apart different computers which have different abilities. And those abilities will be seen on modern computers, and slowly you'll be able to get an idea of what your computer is doing now. Vintage computers give you limited tools. Although that sounds like a bad thing, it's really not, because the kind of computers we use today have the ability to do what seems like anything. So if you have so much to work with, you don't really have a boundary to put yourself in. And you can't really come up with something, because it's like coming up with something with absolutely no prompt, which can be kind of hard to some people. So if you're putting yourself inside of a box, you can slowly see, oh yeah, this can do that. This can do that. What can I put together? Limited tools can slowly give you great ideas, because that's what happened with Miyamoto and Kirby and Commander Keen. And that is very vital today, because even if you're turning off your internet access, you don't really know what to do from there, because computers kind of seem like the only thing you can do is work with the internet, for younger kids, that is. And it's kind of disappointing to see that, because we're not coming up with the greatest ideas anymore. So if we go back to limited tools, kind of brings inspiration into your head. And if you really want to come up with something, you have to figure out how to work within the limits. And those limits will bring lots of benefit, and you could create the best thing ever because you didn't have as many tools. And if you come up with an idea, you can slowly start bringing it over to a modern computer, and that modern computer can optimize what you've just done. It also gives you a style of thinking, the kind of thinking that you can't get out of a modern computer, because that computer hands everything to you, and you really don't have to do much work trying to get anywhere. Because if you are trying to do research, if you're looking something up and it's something pretty basic, it's just given to you. And that's how things are going to start appearing to you. Everything's just given to you. And you slowly stop using your brain. So if you go back to a vintage computer where everything isn't handed to you, you can start learning how to think, learning how to figure out things, learn problem-solving skills, learn how to understand computers. It's a really beneficial style of thinking it gives you, and it's kind of hard to explain because you don't really notice it's happening until it comes in relevant later. Also, we have AI. That kind of comes back to being lazy. Everything's handed to you. Well, we are complaining that AI is taking over the jobs. Yeah, because we're letting it. If we don't learn the skills that AI is starting to do for us, that's why it's taking over, because we can't find people to do those jobs because they don't want to, and because they don't think it's important to learn. So it's kind of like starting to do woodworking. You can't just jump directly into an electric saw. You have to start with a manual saw. Of course, the manual saw would be vintage computers because of all the things it can teach you, and the electric saw would be the modern computers and AI included. Because there was, I cannot remember the one AI that was on a bunch of computers that was before ChatGPT, which everyone was freaking out. Although it could only do a couple of phrases, everyone was freaking out back then too, thinking, oh no, what are we gonna do? It's so smart. Yeah, the same thing is happening now, but that AI did not take over. And we are working with more complex things now. So working with less complex things will be helpful to everything. Ken B back again said, critical thinking skills, learning how to do deep research, the kind that takes more than a chatbot or a quick search on Google. How to consider, frame, and ask meaningful questions of a mentor, and how to find that mentor. How to work on something technical. Okay, the nostalgia that I've been talking about. Why is it relevant to little kids? Why is it relevant to me? I was born in 2013. Well, it's relevant because that could end up being one of the only reasons that adults are interested, although it should not be because of everything I just said. I think it's also really great that if you're interested in vintage computers, you can slowly start realizing what other adults experienced. Because I really like Macs. They were 2000s, and it's really great because I've slowly started to realize how great the 2000s era was. It's really great to start experiencing what other adults experienced. And this might be the only reason, as I said before, some adults are interested. That is kind of why I'm talking about this. I think that it should not be the only reason that adults are interested, even if it is, because that's actually kind of good to think about, because although they just find nostalgia in it, they're also learning all those skills that they didn't even realize. Because if they weren't in it for the nostalgia, then they wouldn't have the same mindset, and they probably wouldn't even talk the same. They would not have an aspect of their personality. Okay, continuing on. Here are the answers from others, and as you can see, there are a lot. Here are all the answers from everyone that I could possibly compile, because these people were so enthusiastic. Not everyone was having the same point of view on it, but it was also so great to see how everyone reacted, because there weren't really any negative answers. Someone gave me a pros and cons list. It was too long to put on here, but they were talking about, after listing the pros and the cons, how they were like, wait, yeah, kids should be into this, and they had to think through it, but they were still thinking about the pros and cons for kids. And considering how much you can see here, it's a huge deal to adults. Ken B back again said, but for the few kids that dress a little differently and who wonder why all the time. Those few who enjoy peeling back the layers of the onion, who peek behind the curtains, those who wonder, what if I press this? For those kids, retro computing might just be a reward in itself, which it totally is, because it's fun. Even if you don't want to admit it, it's still fun. Like, you could just be playing a game on a vintage computer, and it'll be fun. And you might get bored pretty quickly, but you always come back. You don't really just say, oh yeah, I did that forever. I don't need to do that again. Yeah, you come back. As someone who speaks from experience, who has a very short attention span, yes, I come back, and I love retro computers. Retro Reboot said, to understand the iterative nature of computing and how we use and build computers now, the why behind it all. Why is the 32-bit called an x86? Why don't we use 12-bit words? What even is a word, etc.? Or maybe more approachable, the file save icon. What is it? It breaks down computing into its fundamentals because it started out that way. And that's very valuable, because breaking down computing into its fundamentals is how you form an understanding of that computer right there, this TV. Charlie J.V. said, "The more ways you train yourself to think about solving problems, the more capable at solving problems you've never encountered before. You train yourself to be a creative problem solver who can handle anything." I think he said that a lot better than I did. I'm just gonna leave it at that. And then Elizabeth Protogen Kitty. I really like this response because this is kind of the target audience. She said, "Honestly, I'm a teen and I started getting into vintage computers at around 13. It's really a rewarding hobby for a teen, to be honest." And then later she said, "I have an old Dell laptop I still play with." I really like that response. I think it kind of speaks for itself. I'm just gonna leave it at that. No Blue Sky said, "There's also the historical and societal aspects, as obvious as it seems. It's, in my opinion, very valuable to have hands-on experience on period-correct hardware and software. Not just for the nostalgia that drives some of us, but to know where we came from, how the industrial processes evolved so much, and how we lived without smartphones in our pockets and did our daily tasks on software no one would want to try using today." Yep, pretty much sums it up. Those are kind of difficult to use if you're trying to work on them, like as in do work. But if you're just there for fun, it kind of loses all pressure and it's fun again. And you can kind of see how much we've evolved. Okay, page 2. Portasound said, "It is also a relatively cheap and low-stakes hobby. I learned a lot when I had access to e-waste because I didn't care about breaking stuff." Yeah, they're actually made to last. They're made to be repaired because they're not always wanting to update and they're not always, "Yeah, we're discontinuing support on this, go buy a new one." They're made to last. You're not gonna get that notification on the Commodore 64. And then KG Bird said, "This hobby is for kids who want to know how we got here and why things work the way they do. Everything we have today was built on top of these machines. I would second the argument that working with vintage hardware is a good way to build critical thinking skills. Nothing from this era is turnkey except for the game consoles, and you have to learn before you can make these machines do anything." Yeah, I wouldn't recommend taking apart a video game console for your first retro thing, but just saying. And yeah, you do have to learn how they work before you can do anything, because if you just have the thing and it's sitting there in front of you without any experience and it's just there, you just bought it, okay, now what? You have to learn because not everything is walked through for you. And that's also what feeds into the kind of thinking it gives you. B+ said, "Learning the history of anything proves deep insight into how things are now. The QWERTY keyboard is a classic example. I imagine a big topic for vintage computing is bits and bytes from a time when RAM space was precious. That's another thing that requires problem solving. You might have made too many programs and now you don't have any space to save it. That's really unfortunate. I hope that doesn't happen to any kids starting out. That would be kind of disappointing. And I know that it's happened to at least one person in here. So, yeah, problem solving. Try to save your program." And then Z-Sub said, "An experience of the simplicity is also a good reason. See just what can be done within the limits." Philip Andrews said, "You can also fit the concept and operation of the entire machine in your head in one go quite easily and gain a full understanding of how it ticks. That's generally not possible with more contemporary computers." Yeah, those are so small. How do you learn anything from them? And then I want to say Bellstar1120, I really don't know how to pronounce that username. He commented on my past presentation about why kids should be into vintage computers. I got into retro computers as a kid or young teen because I found some old books from the 70s and 80s, and while they were obsolete, they were so different from anything that was still being produced at the time, the 2000s. Most people think computer history is 1950 mainframes, then in 1977, computers instantly shrink down to desktop size, computers with no intermediate phases and in between, and nothing but Microsoft versus Apple after that. Many people don't even know about the ZX Spectrum or Amiga existing, and it's hard to explain that there used to be more than just PC, Mac, and Linux. It's good to look back at the past so we can rediscover alternative ways of doing things today, and a lot of old stuff seems to be well remembered and backed up now bit by bit. The details could easily get lost in the more distant future, so future generations should care about this. It shouldn't just be about pure nostalgia. I think that one was great. I stole the comment because it was that good. Didn't think that would ever happen, stealing someone's comment off of a video. But here I am. That was just really good, and I think it speaks for itself. I don't need to further elaborate on it. Now let's talk about the community. So this community is mostly consisted of older adults. And it might be pretty difficult to approach them because they might look scary, or they might look like they don't want to talk to you, or they might look like they think you're about to come over and destroy what they're working on. But that's not the case, I would hope. None of the people I've talked to have been like that. I have gone up to people at retro computing conventions. This is from VCF Southwest 2024, this picture. And I think everyone there was really nice. I talked to a bunch of people. I talked to some retro YouTubers there as well, and everyone is super nice. They all want to talk about their stuff that they have, even if they are the most anxious person in the world. They will still talk about it, I know from experience. And they will talk about it forever. It's mind-blowing how much they know. And having physical interactions with people rather than watching them on YouTube or looking stuff up is actually really helpful because you can add input, you can start exchanging ideas with other people, and nobody's mean. It's really difficult to find that these days because it's cool to be mean to people now. Where did that come from? And I think I've had really good experiences. The few kids that I've talked to have also had great experiences. I've made 2 friends from this community because they were really enthusiastic about it, although they couldn't find anyone who was their age range. With all of this, I could go up to someone, and if they were selling something, I could manage a discount because they were happy I was involved in this. And I think it was kind of funny. This guy showed me a flip phone and said, "What's this?" And I said, "A flip phone?" And he was like, "What? How did you know that?" And I was like, "Oh, is that what we've come to?" I think it's really unfortunate that that's what we've come to, but it was also kind of funny. I also would like to add that if you wanted to work on a computer later in the future after talking to someone, and then you think back to what they said, chances are you'll remember something that you didn't ever think would come in handy. If it's on a completely different computer, chances are they'll still share some similarity. And you can think, wait a minute, I could try that. And then chances are it'll work. I think it's really helpful to speak to people in person, and I think it's also really great that everyone in this community really wants to talk about their stuff. Okay, now it is recap time. So we all know everything started in vintage computers. It is quite literally the beginning. We also know video games rooted off of some things that you wouldn't expect. Kirby came out of pure boredom. It also gives you intelligence and kind of skills that you didn't think you would get out of experimenting. The nostalgia, which drives a lot of adults today, should be brought into this generation and will be if we continue this hobby. And the community is just overall really kind, really welcoming, and they will not be mad if you're there. If anything, they will be the happiest person alive. Well, thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
For a young person starting out in retro vintage computing, have you got to pick a system or an area you recommend they aim towards when they first start off?
Yes, actually, the first computer I ever worked on, which I think is a great computer to start with, is the Tandy 3000. It's just like a big beige box, but also you can work on it, you can take it apart. It's just a great spot to start in, I think.
Out of all the systems you've seen in the museum, which ones inspired you the most to be like a retro collector?
I don't know, actually. I'd say like a lot of the Macs, because I'm a huge Mac person. I really like a lot of the Macs that were here. I like all of them. I like using them, and I also like seeing the Blueberry Mac was on a wall. I really like seeing that. That was really cool. Yeah.
How did you get into when was the first time you thought, oh, I'm interested in retro?
Well, my dad likes to talk, and he likes to talk a lot. And I'd hear a lot about vintage computers, and he would want me to get interested, and I started slowly getting interested. And although I have the world's shortest attention span, and he probably is surprised I'm here talking about this, I really enjoyed seeing them, and I started working on them slowly, and I started playing with them slowly, and it's a huge interest now.
Thank you. You showed us a picture of the IBM 1401 right at the beginning. Have you used a computer from that era?
Like the IBM computer that you're talking about, or like something from that era?
So one of those ones that fill the room.
I have not used one of them. I've seen a couple of them, and that room is actually really hot. But yeah, I have seen them. I haven't actually personally gotten to use one, but I have seen them.
Okay, thanks.
There are a lot of retro YouTubers that, okay, some of them might not appeal to the younger kids, but like there are some of them that just are really easy to watch, and they're just fun to watch, and they kind of ease you into the hobby as well. Usagi Electric is a pretty good one, because he kind of accepts the failure and moves on and tries to work with it. And then Action Retro, his videos are just very easy to watch. He makes the hobby seem like the best thing ever. Is it Kari? Yeah, so there's also Kari, and I think is she British? Yeah, she's British, and she's pretty young, and she's showing immense interest in like a lot of what she didn't even live through, and I think that was pretty great. Does anyone have any questions?
All right, last one.
Okay.
Favorite game of all time?
Oh my goodness. I don't know how to answer that, actually. Like, do you want favorite retro game or favorite like game ever?
Game ever.
Hold on, it's kind of a difficult question. I had a Minecraft phase last year. That was a very, very bad situation. I was on the computer for like, Dad, how long was I on the computer per day last year?
They play Minecraft a lot.
Yeah, and then I really like most of the Wii games because I like the interactivity, and then connect, like a bunch of the Connect games. What's the one that we have on the Xbox 360?
Sports?
Yeah, but there's 2 sports ones.
Adventure?
Ye- Yeah, but there's one of them on the Xbox 360 that I think is really fun because I like how it's like making you move, but like I think it's kind of cool because it kind of feels like you're in the game. Yeah. Are we done?
Well,
Okay.
thank you very much.